Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Atif, how are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah.
Okay, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay, so we will continue inshallah with our very cursory review of the Sharia inshallah ta'ala. So today we're looking at financial contracts. So looking at some key principles and concepts, concept of wealth, concept of debt, concept of clarity, concept of common practice and general need, autonomy, some key, the main topics we look at in fiqh, classical mortgage versus murabaha, and some creative models of creating capital. Okay, so we just recall, what is the point of the Sharia? The point of the Sharia is to make us the slaves of Allah, turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So each of us, we pray and we have focus. We finish our prayer and we walk out into the street and we still have focus. So we are continually drawing near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in everything we do, whether it's in direct worship or indirect worship. Just give me 1 second. Okay, and so for which reason there are certain rules to protect us from kind of having hard feelings, I guess, towards other people. So Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said in Bukhari Muslim, he says, and do not feel envy against one another. Do not spy, do not pry on one another, and do not bid each other up. Bidding each other up, i.e. being a stooge, right? I'm trying to buy a car and you're trying to increase the money every single time I bid, even though you don't want it, just to trick me to think that it's worth something, right? You're cheating me on something. And be Allah's slaves, brethren to one another. So this is the spirit of organizing human interaction, is that you can all be slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you can worship Allah. You have the space and sense of what is right and wrong, that you're not continually at enmity with others. And another version of the same hadith, and do not estrange mutual relations, and do not intervene in the transaction which is likely to be settled. So you've already agreed on a sale, and I come in and ruin it for you. So this is not Islamic. Okay, the same thing applies to marriage, right? That someone's proposing to somebody and that family has already accepted them, and then you come along and step in the middle. This is something that creates baghda, enmity towards one another. It makes it difficult for us to be slaves of Allah. It's yes, in principle, you could be a slave of Allah if you're wronged by everybody on the face of the earth. That's true, but it's difficult to do that. Right? It's much easier to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when things are smooth between you and other people. And as one of the late shuyukh scholars of Damascus, he said that what is the point is that you should be with Allah without any relation. You're just completely with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How exactly? What is my relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? I am zero before him. I am not the one who caused him. I'm not the one who did this or did that. I'm just with Allah, and there is no relationship. It's just Allah. That you should be in that kind of relationship, and that you should be with your fellow man without any ego. Right? And so again, it's very difficult to do this if there's just free for all. And so that's why the Sharia comes along and limits certain things we can and can't do in order to protect these feelings of camaraderie and this feeling of justice in society, that we can feel that we can actually go to the mosque and give salams to people and not be thinking what on earth's going on. Okay, so these are the general rules. So concepts of wealth, concepts of debt, concepts of clarity, as I mentioned. So key points here. You have, brother, is it Ridwan as well? Ridwan. So concepts of wealth, right? So we can talk about tangible goods, things you can actually touch, currency itself, and services. These are generally three categories that you can break down all concepts of wealth in the Sharia into. Something that is worth something is one of these three things. It's either a tangible good. Here is a piece of marble. Here is a potato. here is a car, here is something, okay? Or it could be a currency itself, such as gold and silver and its modern equivalents. And so, as we'll mention, gold and silver are not supposed to be commodities. So obviously they can be commodities, but then when they become commodities, there are restrictions on how we use them as commodities. So there is the currency, the thing that is used to give fluidity to the exchange of tangible goods, and then there are services that you can provide. Okay, and so intangible goods can either be fungible or non-fungible, right? Fungible meaning, for example, things that can be weighed and counted. For example, here is a kilo of tomatoes. Well, is this kilo of tomatoes any different to that one? No, right? Unless you, for example, is a different, different quality or something like that. But you say, for example, a bag of rice. Okay, so here there's a continuum, a kilo of rice, this thing of that thing. So fungible, they are. If I scoop this bag of rice out and put that one in its place, it would be the same thing. A liter of water, this is the same as that, right? Fungible or non-fungible, each and every thing is independent. For example, this ring is worth something, and that ring is something else. This is a particular, for example, something of particular value, right? It's not exchangeable. Fungible, something. This is just like that, right? And so this is an important concept, and it has repercussions of what could happen to it if it was damaged, what would happen to something else, etc. So tangible goods could be fungible or non-fungible. And tangible goods could also be used in spot contracts, meaning, for example, I'm going to sell you this pen right now. So it's this pen, or a pen of this quality, a used biro, for example. Right? An iPhone 6, right? So it could be this thing or something like this, right? So we can either have spot contracts or debt, meaning you pay for something and I owe it to you. You pay in advance, for example, for this Ferrari, and according to certain specifications, and I deliver it to you. So I owe you something, but it's not tangible. There is a debt. So you are owed something, but it is not money. You're not owed money, right? But you are owed this thing. So you are owed, for example, this one shop buys from another shop something in advance. They pay, $20,000 for such and so many bags of rice and so many tomatoes and so many this and so many that and so many different things and so many whatever toys, certain things specified. These things are now owed to the other company. So it's a debt, right? A debt. And this is what's mentioned, for example, in Ayat Dain. Ayat Dain talks about buying in advance, right? You meet somebody while traveling, you want to buy something in advance. I want you to turn up next year with so many camels. I'll pay you this gold now, but I need these camels next year, for example. So you're specifying what it is. Similarly, currency could be spot contracts sometimes, for example, or it could be. So here I'm going to give you this money, right? It could be what we call ayn. So here, when I mean a spot contract, I'm not really talking about time. I'm talking about the level of specificity. Is it an ayn or is it for dhimma? Is it a specific thing? Is it this thing in your hand, or is it anything like this? Right. So you could buy, for example, this pound note from me, or a pound. Right. It's two different things. Right. So does it have this complete this identity, or is it something that is for dhimma, that is owed to you as a debt? Right. So currency could be owed, or could be that this thing is specifically yours. For example, I go to the bank and I do a deposit. The bank owes me $100. I put $100 in. That means they owe me $100, right? As opposed to, I have a suitcase full of with $100 in it. I close the suitcase and I put it in the safe in the bank. So they don't owe me $100. They have this very $100 that I own. They can't use it, and that's mine. It's a different thing, right? So the relationship, is it with that particular item, or is it a debt? Similarly, services. Services could be spot. For example, I want you. It's slightly different because a debt, by its very nature, a service by its very nature is a debt, in that it's not realized yet. So you pay for a service, right? I hereby hire you to work for me for 40 hours a week to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, where's the service immediately? It's not. It's going to come bit by bit, and at the end of the month, I'm going to pay you. or it might pay you in the beginning of the month. So in this very nature, there is a problem of that it's not even there. But the point is that thing is either starting immediately. So I want to use your car now, or I want a car like this to be used in, for example, 10 years or in a year, right? In a year, I want 50 hotel rooms like this. Each room has like this. So it's not specific. There's no specificity to it, right? There's no specificity to it. So it's a debt. So I have now paid for these services. These services will be rendered in the future, right? So they are a debt. You owe me this service. Okay, you owe me this service. Okay, so services could be specifically this particular person or particular thing right now, or they could be owed. Currency could be owed, as in the case of that the bank owes you money because you put money in there, or that you leave money with somebody, you leave your wallet with somebody, so then those actual notes are yours. Tangible items as well. You can buy a car in advance and have it delivered later, so they owe you a car of that specification, or they owe you this very car. And so this again, whenever we have a debt, it has to be generic and not specific. When I mean generic and not specific, it means it has to be it has to be known what it is, right? So there is sufficient detail to know what it is. There cannot be this one over that one. So for example, when you click and order your new laptop from Mac, you're not buying this laptop that I have in my hand. You are buying something of this specification. Okay, there's a slight difference there, right? And a significant difference. So whenever go ahead.
So what about buying a produce? Like you go to a garden and say, you know what, I'm just buying the harvest of this garden. So we come to an agreement and say, whatever you're going to harvest, I'm going to buy it at this rate.
That's problematic for reasons that we're going to mention.
Okay.
Inshallah, but slightly different. So that what you're doing is you're doing a kind of forward sale. You say, for instance, I'm just going to rent you. So depending on how we do the contract, it can be problematic, depending how you do it, and depending on other things as well. But that's slightly different. Slightly different. So here, what I'm talking about is a generic or specific service. So, for example, one company outsources work to another company. So we need you to go through this database and do these certain projects. So I'm hiring this generic work to be done. This is the specification, and we're going to pay you X amount to do it. So you owe me this service, right? It's slightly different to, for example, having my own company do it. It's a slightly different relationship because you're dealing with your own staff, which is slightly different to a debt that is owed to you. They owe you this service, right? So we're paying you to do this job, this thing, right? You can have repercussions on how, for example, what happened, the termination of the contract. So, for example, you hire me to work 9 to 5 in your company, and I die or I get sick. Right? It's very different to you hire this company to do the service, and they need, for example, the service includes having 5 people to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, you didn't hire those individuals, did you? So if any of them get sick or they die, that's irrelevant to you because you just hired that service in general. When you book a plane, an airplane ticket, you didn't choose which airplane it was. It wasn't specifically this airplane or that airplane. It's just a service. So to you, it's irrelevant whether or not, for example, they don't have any planes today. That's irrelevant. I paid for a ticket to fly from San Francisco to Los Angeles at this time. It doesn't matter which airplane it is. I just want to fly. Yeah, if you bought business class, that's a different service. We're talking about just a generic service. I paid for this. I want this service. You owe me that service, whether it comes from here or there. As opposed to, I want this captain to fly this plane now. That's a specific thing. It's not a generic debt, and that cannot be a debt. Right? So debts are always generic in their very nature, as opposed to anything that is on the middle, which is this specific thing. Okay, any questions, Rizwan? Okay, so the concept of wealth then, so is it halal then to hire someone to do a haram service? Okay, well, it's a service at the end of the day, right? So I'm going to hire somebody to be a hitman. I'm going to hire somebody to be a prostitute. I'm going to hire somebody to, I don't know, or for example, to recite Quran. Is that a service? Right? It's not even haram, but I want you to recite Quran, that's all. I want you to pray on my behalf. Can you hire somebody to do that? So it's not even haram, but is that even wealth? That's the question. Is that even a service? And the answer is no. You can't hire somebody to shoot somebody. Right? That's not a service. The Sharia doesn't acknowledge it. You can't hire somebody to pray on your behalf. Right? That's not an act of worship. It's not money. So yes, you value it. You personally value it. True, I accept that. But the Sharia doesn't value it, so you can't do that. Or a petty service, right? I want you to stand in front of my shop for 1 second. I want you to walk past my shop, for example. Generally speaking, you can't do that, right? There may be exceptions in certain scenarios, but generally speaking, something that's petty and pointless, like I just want you to walk past. Why, you can take my picture? No. Is anyone going to see me? No, I just want you to walk past. That's all. I'll pay you $3 trillion to do that. That's it. And so it's so petty and pointless that the Sharia won't even allow you to do that, even if you accepted it, right? Same thing with tangible things that are petty. You can't do that. You can't sell, for example, I'm going to sell, I don't know, the ink on this paper. So the doodle, I'm going to get the ink off this paper and give it to you. It's worthless. So it's a petty amount. So you can't even do that, right? So the Sharia would stop you and say, no, you're not allowed to waste your money like that. That's wrong. Certainly haram services, you can't do that, right? So for example, the Prophet explicitly forbade two services, the mahar, quote unquote, the dowry, quote unquote, given to a prostitute, or the thank you present given to the fortune teller. So you go to a fortune teller and he says, you know, you should do this or do that or whatever, and this is going to happen to you, and it turns right. You don't go and give him a present. It's called the halawan al-kahin. Oh, thank you, you got it right, or whatever. It's not a service. He did not do a service. You can't do that. That's not something that's not, you know, well, didn't you pay her to sleep with you? I mean, she wouldn't have slept with you if you didn't pay her, and she was happy and you were happy. Isn't that just okay? I mean, isn't that right? No, the Sharia doesn't acknowledge that. That's not property. You cannot do that. That's not a service that is acceptable, right? And so you cannot pay for things like that. Similarly, fiat currency, right? Fiat from the Latin word fiat, be, right? Currency that's created, you know, almost ex nihilo out of nothing, is problematic in principle, right? So originally we had pieces of gold and silver, and then we had pieces of paper that represented gold and silver, and then we came along and said, you know what? Do we really need this gold and silver? Can we just put it somewhere else? Because at the end of the day, I don't really care about the gold and silver, and you don't care about this gold and silver. And as long as I have something called a dollar, you will give me a car, you will do a service, you know, or you can pay for things. It has currency. It goes around by the very definition. So here's the problem. Here's the question: is currency currency by the fact that everybody buys the lie, or do we have to look at something that has intrinsic value? So when everybody was using gold, it doesn't matter if you like gold or not. It has intrinsic value. Silver has intrinsic value, right? When you barter and sell chickens for donkeys or whatever it is, that has intrinsic value. A dollar does not have intrinsic value. It's just a lie that everybody accepts. So that's why it's called fiat currency. It's just made up. But the fact that everybody does accept it, does it give it value? Does it give it value? Right? And then by the same token, Bitcoin. So you just created this thing. Now, again, what will be the argument for, or rather, not the argument, what would be the argument for example, why, for example, dollars are real and pounds are real and euros are real, is because everybody accepts and it has universal acceptance. Okay, does the Bitcoin have universal acceptance? Initially, no. It seems almost it does now. There are other problems with it as well, but the question is, what do we define as wealth? What do we define as wealth? Does it have to have intrinsic value? Number one. Number two, if it doesn't have to have intrinsic value, but it has currency, meaning accepted everywhere, how much does it have to be accepted? So that's the issue with the Bitcoin. Is it universally accepted or not? Is it backed, for example, by any government or not? Right? That will be the question there. right? And what the hesitation in it, among other things. Intellectual property. So your right to download my lecture. I mean, what service did I give you? Right? So again, it'd be the same thing. The fact that it's bought and sold, somebody does go and buy a list of names from somebody else, information is a huge thing. So again, the fact that it's bought and sold, doesn't that make it property? Just by the mere definition of what people do, like people buy and sell it, therefore it is property, right? Or do we say no, it's not property, but you will be harmed if we didn't respect it? Okay, that's different then, right? So if it is wealth in itself, meaning I, for example, pirated these videos. These videos are worth X, therefore I owe you X. Or do we judge the punishment based on the harm? So we say, well, you didn't actually harm the company because by pirating them in this scenario and then putting it on your website, you actually publicized the company and made them money. So at the end of the day, you didn't even harm them, right? So how do we judge, how do we deal with intellectual property? Do we say, okay, obviously it's haram to steal intellectual property, there's no question. But how do we look at it? Do we look at it as money, or do we look at it as harm? It's like stealing monopoly money from somebody. Like, do you look at the monopoly money itself, or the worth of monopoly money, or the harm that's happened by allowing people to steal monopoly money from other people? Right?
But isn't the monopoly money, or isn't this issue about ownership?
Yeah, monopoly money is just a kind of, but it's just as an example. But the issue is, how do we look at this? Is it wealth in itself, or do we just say it's not wealth in itself and it's in principle fine, but because it harms people, we're going to forbid it, and because you harmed them, we're going to now have you pay reparations? So that's the thing. Did you pay what you took, or do you pay the reparations? There's a difference.
So the problem with intellectual property is that before the concept of intellectual property was introduced, nobody even considered it as a property.
Exactly.
So once that right was recognized, now the question, I mean, I would actually pose a different question, which is that now that the society has accepted this as a right and there's ownership on it, then effectively by copying the intellectual property, you are stealing.
Correct. So you're stealing and it's haram. But the question is, what are you stealing? What is exactly happening? Are you stealing wealth, like you stole a piece of gold, or are you harming somebody by not respecting that system? So if we say you stole a piece of gold, you have to pay back the piece of gold.
Right.
Right. But if we say, no, you're harming me, for example, what do you have to, you insult me. What do you have to pay for insulting me? Right. So in Western law, obviously there are like libel and these kind of things. They can be like, there's damage, right? But normally in Sharia, for example, you wouldn't say that you harmed my name. Like, well, what is that? If you accuse me of certain things, there might be a punishment for that. But normally it's like, that's not, my name is not property. And so if at all, as we do in the West, I'm going to sue you for damages, but I'm not going to sue you for the money or the value that you took off my name. I'm going to sue you for damages. So that's how, so it's a slight difference. So if intellectual property, if we look at it as property itself, we can say, listen, you pirated these videos or you took this information is worth X, you have to give that much back.
Mm-hmm.
Or we say, no, how much was this company damaged?
Well, the damage would be in two ways, right? If you take the example of a intellectual property that one company steals or uses in their product and sells it without paying the other company before basically paying them any royalty. Yeah. So they will come and say, you're harming me.
I mean, if you take an example from Western law, intellectual property with old publications, right? So I don't know what the law is exactly, something like after 100 years or 50 years, there's no longer printing. Copyright, right?
There's no copyright, right? Yeah.
That's the same thing. So where does that come from? So
I think it's 80 years.
80 years or whatever it is. The point is,
Yeah.
there is a judgment that you are no longer harming the writer or whatever it is. Okay, so now Microsoft makes something. 80 years later, you steal it from them, and they do not care. It's irrelevant. It does not affect them in any way whatsoever. In any whatsoever. If we consider intrinsic wealth, it doesn't matter if they care or not. It doesn't matter that you stole money, you have to give that money back. But if it doesn't affect them at all, do we judge by effect, or do we judge in intrinsic value? This is the question. Has it become intrinsic value? That's the question, right?
The answer would be,
yeah, go ahead.
the answer would be that it is not intrinsic value.
Exactly. Right. So here's the problem then. So what's the difference between copyright after 80 years and 81 years? Right? As opposed to you stole so you 200 years ago, you stole my grandmother's watch. It doesn't matter. Principle in fiqh is al-haqq la yasqutu bit-taqadum. Taqadum. Right? A financial right is not dropped by the fact that you had 100 years or 200 years goes past. Right? So there is a conceptual problem here. Right? At the end of the day, it is haram to infringe upon intellectual property, to break copyright rules, all these things. We respect that. That's fine. Okay? And that's your moral problem if you're not going to do that. That's fine. We know that, the moral issue. The question is, what is it in terms of a financial right? We're not interested in the morality of it. Morality is haram. We're done and dusted. The question is, when we bring this to court, how do we deal with it? For example, in the Shafi'i school, if you steal my car, what do we do? You steal my car for 1 week, okay? And you give the car back as it is. It's fine, okay? No damage to it. What do? We say a car like that, how much would it be rented out for? And you say, well, it would range from this to this. You take the highest range, and that's what you would pay. Because it's possible that during that week, I could have rented it out, and I could have got the best deal, and I'm going to take you to task for that. So you're going to pay the highest rate. So there's a whole system there, right? We've already judged this is wealth, and they've judged it in a certain way, and they dealt with it in a very particular way. They look at the usufruct of the use of the car. But here was the use of the intellectual property is more judged in terms of harm than in terms of the actual intrinsic wealth, because it's just difficult to give it intrinsic wealth. Like it just by very nature, it's not intrinsic wealth, right? And so this is the issue, right? So how do we deal with it exactly, right? And so again, at the end of the day, abusing intellectual property is wrong regardless. So even Microsoft are not harmed. It's going to be haram. They say, we don't permit you to do that. It's going to be haram, because if we say it's property, if they have a right to that, then you can't do it. It doesn't matter after a million years. It's my right.
But over here, the thing I'm struggling with it is that the law that you have created is saying that after these many years, the owner is losing the right to value.
Who has the right to say that?
So, I mean, the country's law, where you can say
I didn't agree.
Hmm?
Well, I say I don't agree, and the rest of the world disagrees.
So that's where the issue comes, right?
So then I might come along and say, well, no, it's my right. Actually, it's still, I don't care if it's at 80 years. It's my intellectual right. This is my right. So again, if we treat it as property, in a proper sense, if it's wealth in a proper sense, it doesn't matter. So let's say, for example, United States say, well, after, squatters' rights, for example. I don't know if they have that in England, America, but squatters' rights, right? It's a major thing in England where you have squatters' rights. Like the fact that I've been here for the last whatever year, my kids grew up here, I have a right to stay here.
Mm-hmm.
And we say, well, excuse me, that's called theft, right? I mean, you can do that and you get away with it, but before Allah, that's called theft. That's someone's property. You can't do that, And so this is immoral, whether it's the law or not. It doesn't matter, right? And so yes, we would respect that, and you can't break the law, etc. That's fine. But at the end of the day, it doesn't define morality, right? And it doesn't try to, right? Law tries to organize people, doesn't necessarily define morality. And so the point is, the law would be very useful sometimes because it helps us define how do we judge things, and it's like it's a discussion. But the point is, that the fact that somebody will come along and say, well, after 80 years it changes. Well, is that wealth or not? Right? Then it's not absolute wealth. And so what is it then? So maybe is it somehow, so again, so it comes back to the issue is, do we judge it in terms of the view of how much harm did you cause that company or that individual, or do we judge it as absolute wealth? That's the basic discussion, right? Both ways is haram, because you can't harm other people and you can't take their property. But where are you falling? Are you falling under the category of harming somebody, or are you falling under the category of taking their property? Where are we falling, right? Okay, and so other things, for example, can you buy the right to buy something? Right? Can you buy the right to buy something? So is that wealth? So I have the right, for example, to have to get the first choice to buy something. Right? Is that a service? Right? So these things existed in the past, and it's not something new. And in principle, no, you cannot buy the right to buy something. So something that is not an intrinsic value, you cannot buy or sell, right? And this is where it comes into, for example, pyramid businesses. When we look at these things, like you're making money out of what exactly, right? So these pyramid businesses, you, for example, sell, and then when you get this many sales, you're going to get to this level, and then you're going to get this. And then what you'll see is there's certain times where you'll be, for example, paying for a membership of something, and this person up in the ladder will get this, and this person. It's like, what are you actually paying for? Right? And so sometimes it's very clearly a service, right? It's very clearly a service. I'm paying, for example, for this educational thing. I'm paying for this access to this or access to that. There's a clear service being rendered to you, and it does enable you to kind of spiral up there. But sometimes it's just money. You're just paying to be able to access something else which has money in it, which is just money buying money, right? And so, as we mentioned, these things are seriously problematic.
So when you say right to buy, isn't
Right.
a put and a sell contract something similar?
Say
Where
it
you're
again.
saying in the stock market, when they do like, or if this stock market rises by, or this share rises by this much, then I will buy it or I will sell it at that price. So you're sort of telling the broker, I want to basically, but I guess it's not right to buy because you haven't
No, you're
bought.
you're telling him. But basically, let's say for example, I say, do you want to buy my phone? Here's my phone. You say sure. So say, listen, I'm gonna before we even talk about the price, you have to pay $1 to talk to me about it. Like, I don't understand, Farid. You have to pay me $1 so that you can even talk to me about buying this. So what's that? Like, that's not a service.
Mhm.
Like, if it was a service, I was going to sit and talk to you for 1 minute about prices of phones, maybe. And along with it is this, for example, so it's a company that advises in general and sells to people, maybe. But so what did you buy? The thing is, what you're paying for has to be a service in itself, that initial thing, right? And it can't be something that is that in itself is not a service. So when so it might be that you put a whole contract together. That's different, right? For example, I'm going to go. Part of my flight involves going through a luxury lounge in some airport, and I have a right, the access to meet certain people, whatever. That's great. But as a whole package, yeah, but not in itself, right? Just the right to buy somebody, just the opportunity of seeing somebody. That's not really a service in itself. It's not really a thing in itself, right? So again, these are issues of concept of wealth that needs to be defined a bit clearer. And sometimes these things evolve. They have a certain form in the beginning and they have another form later on, right? And they can change slightly. But the point is, just the concept of wealth. Here I put question marks here to be, the question. So, for example, am I promoting the idea that, for example, I don't want dollars? Of course, I want dollars. Give me all your dollars, right? But it's a problem, right? It's a genuine problem to just as a concept, right?
So the example that I wanted to call was the call option.
Call option?
Yeah, call options are financial contracts that give the option buyer the right, but not the obligation, to buy a stock, bond, commodity, or other asset or instrument at a specified price within a specified time period.
Yeah, it's problematic. So you need to ask a specialist. I can't give a fatwa, but it's problematic for this very reason: the right to buy something. So there are many things. There are many things that are halal in stock markets, and there's many games that we can play which are haram. And so you need to ask a specialist. So I know Mufti Abdullah Nana, he's a local, and he's very good at these things. And I've also Mufti Taqi Uthmani in his book, in many of his books, he writes on these things. But I don't know details, and I can't give a fatwa on the spot. Another concept is indemnity, the fact that you have to pay for something. So you are an owner, you own a car, and you decide to smash your car to pieces. That's up to you. That's fine. I come and sit on your car without your right and scratch, for example, the paint with my key and slash the tires, for example. This is called, now in the process, while sitting on your car without your permission, while scratching the paint away without your permission, something else happens to the car. So this is called unconditional indemnity. Yad al-Daman. You are liable for anything that happens to the car. So while I was cutting up, for example, slashing your tires with my knife to get back at you for some argument we had, something happened to the other tire, but that wasn't my intention. It doesn't matter. You're liable, right? And so when anybody's playing with money or property, we're always going to label them as either the owner, somebody who has conditional indemnity or unconditional indemnity. For example, you're hiring a house. I'm renting my flat right now. What is my relationship to this flat is I have a conditional indemnity. If I get an axe and start hacking away or at the walls, if I come and lodge 10 people in the flat that's supposed to have 5 people, when I don't know, turned it into a factory, use it with outside the agreement, I shift from having a conditional indemnity to unconditional indemnity. Suddenly I'm liable for anything that happens to it. Before that, I have conditional indemnity. For example, if there was an earthquake, I'm not responsible. If someone breaks in and breaks the window, I'm not responsible. It's not my. I have what's called yad al-aman. I was given it as a trust, and I'm using it within that trust. I'm not liable, right? But here, if I shift to misuse, suddenly now I'm reliable for everything. So now, for example, while I started using this residential property as a factory, someone broke into the window, I'm now liable, right? Because it's now my relationship with that property is now shifted. And these are certain concepts that we talk about in fiqh. Okay, autonomy. What does it mean is who and what can own, right? Who and what can own, and who can use their wealth. Right? We're not going to linger on this very much, but this is the kind of things we talk about. Who can own something? So you can have, for example, a company could own something and an individual could own something, right? Can a mosque own something? So you can donate to the mosque and you can also have a waqf, an endowment, but what kind of ownership is that? Right? What kind of ownership is that? Can a mosque, for example, be liable for damages or something like that, right? And so this is the whole concept in the West of limited liability companies, all these kind of things. Like how can you limitations of how you can own something, and also the liability of that thing, right? So essentially, you're talking about a limited liability that it cannot. There's limitations on how much debt it can get into, right, and how that works, etc. But more importantly, on a simple level, we talk about who can use their wealth. So generally speaking, any able-minded person. Sane, able-minded person, and is able-minded in respect to that specific financial activity. So we would say, for example, here's a 14-year-old boy. He can buy and sell, for example, I don't know, radio-controlled cars, but he can't necessarily buy and sell cars unless he's experienced in cars. If he's experienced in cars, he can't buy and sell companies, right? So when a 5-year-old inherits a company from their father, and they sell it for a skateboard to Apple, that's an invalid sale. It's a haram sale, and also it's an invalid sale. We wouldn't recognize it, right? Because he's not an able-bodied individual, right? On top of that, the assets cannot be frozen. So, for example, somebody who is bankrupt, somebody who's, the assets are frozen because, or other reasons. They're a spendthrift and their assets have been frozen. Or, for example, they're on a deathbed. So this person is in ICU, and while they're in ICU, they give all their money away. There's some of their money will be given away. They give it all to save the whales, for example, while they're in ICU. We will not recognize that all that transaction. We'll only recognize 1/3 of it. 1/3 of it will go to save the whales, but the rest of it won't. Why? Because they're about to die, basically, and so that doesn't count. There's limitations on their use of their assets. So Question then, is puberty necessary? So according to the Shafi'is, for example, I'm not sure about the Hanbalis and Malikis, but Hanafis do not stipulate this. So this is a debate between the Hanafis and the Shafi'is. Is it a condition for a valid sale or a valid financial contract for you to have reached puberty? So the argument of the Shafi'is is yes, you do, because ultimately you are going to get involved in contracts that need you to bear testimony. So you're going to, for example, go and buy something, and someone's going to claim you didn't pay for it and you did, and there's going to be testimony. And now when you're standing before the court, testimony only means something if you have morality. And you're not morally responsible until you have reached puberty. So what's the point in you getting involved in a contract and then someone saying this, and you're going to have to speak before the judge, but then it doesn't even matter if you lie or not because you're not even morally responsible, right? And the argument then of the Hanafis would be, well, don't kids buy and sell things? Like, doesn't a kid go to the shop and buy something? So they would say, listen, as long as it's been done. Even some of the Shafi said that this has been done since time immemorial. People send their kids to the shop and go and buy something. Why not? Right. So technically, before a Shafi Qadi, the child went to the shop and bought a 50-cent chocolate bar, and it was claimed that he didn't do it, and it got to court. They would say it's not a contract to begin with. It's like a sheep buying something. Like this it doesn't have any legal validity. Right? It's not legally valid. That doesn't mean anything, right? It's your fault for giving the kid this chocolate bar. His giving you the money is meaningless, and you giving him that is meaningless. It's not a transfer of ownership, right? Whereas for the Hanafis, they wouldn't mind, and practically speaking, the Shafis, they don't mind either, practically speaking. But technically, as a legal system, they would. It's legally invalid and therefore immoral, right? But generally speaking, as long as they're able-minded with respect to that financial activity, it's fine. So they have the wherewithal to deal with normal grocery shopping, then they can do normal grocery shopping, right? But when they spend, for example, $20,000 on something, we're like, well, hang on a minute, how old is this kid, right? We would question whether or not they can do that. Puberty. What about the corrupt, right? So the verse of the Quran mentions about talking about to orphans. It says, listen, if you feel that the orphans are able-minded, they have rushd, then give them their money, but don't give them the money before that because that's not fair. Like you're going to give, for example, you want to abuse an orphan. So he's 5 years old, you give him his money and then you say, oh, why didn't you give me some? Then he gives it to you. So then you get all this money from him. That's not fair. So it's an abuse to a child to give them access to their money and give them and to recognize their contracts if they are not together, able-minded. But is part of able-mindedness morally able? So, for example, here is an 18-year-old. You give him the money, and the first thing he does is goes to a bar and buys and spends money on alcohol. And that's what he does. So, according to the Shafi'is, it is not legally valid for somebody who has reached puberty while not demonstrating able-mindedness and while not demonstrating moral uprightness. So that would mean if he never prays in his life, his assets are frozen for the rest of his life. He's a 40-year-old, 50-year-old, he can't buy and sell anything. What would happen is we freeze his assets and appoint somebody over him and say, listen, just spend money on him as per his needs. But he can't buy and sell anything. Right? Which is a bit extreme, if you think about it, because, not the whole ummah are not angels, of course, right? So that would mean half of the ummah or more would be unable to get involved in financial transactions, right? And so some of the Shafis, for example, they objected to this. They say, how is it possible that before a Sharia court, you would forbid a 20-year-old who doesn't pray from buying and selling, but yet you would allow a Jew or a Christian? So doesn't a Jew or Christian or a non-Muslim in front of the Sharia court, doesn't he buy and sell? Right? So that doesn't make sense. Like he's going to, for example, I don't know, build a church or do something that is in principle immoral, right? Sharia-wise, but you're allowing that. So they argue that doesn't really make sense. But anyway, it is an argument. It's profound, right? So according to an amazing quote from Imam Shafi, he says that the person who does not pray is considered mentally handicapped. They're considered mentally handicapped. You don't pray, you don't fast, you don't do basic religious things. You are mentally handicapped, and therefore you're barred from accessing your property, which is a profound point to think about it, but not super practical, of course. Third party with only retroactive permission, right? So I know that you want to sell your car, and I'm at your house, and Bob comes by and says, "Oh, is Artif selling his car?" I say, "Yeah, he's selling his car. How much are you selling for?" "Oh, 10K." And he's like, "Okay, I'll buy it." I'm like, "Done. Here's the keys, bro. Just, give the money to Artif when he comes back. He's your neighbor. You trust him. That's fine." But you did not give me permission to do that. You didn't give me the official agency to do that. But retroactively, when you turned up, you're like, "Good sale, bro. I was only everyone was offering me 9, and I managed to sell it for 10. Thanks. I appreciate that." So again, according to the Shafi'is, we would say that you weren't the agent and you weren't the owner. So how is that a valid sale? Right? According to the Hanafis and Imam Shafi in his older school, is that it's fine because you had retroactive permission. Right? It's okay. Like, basically when Atif turns up, he either accepts it or rejects it. Salam alaikum, Sister Fahima. Sorry, I didn't see you coming in there. Okay. Other issues, charity from a child's money. So my child has inherited $50 million. And he's 5 years old. So he has no autonomy, of course, because he's 5. So what can I do with his money? So as the guardian, what can I do with his money? So you can only do that which is in his financial interests. You can only do that which is in financial interest. So it's not in his financial interest to give money, give charity away. You can't do that. If, for example, Bob is selling a car and the car is worth 9,000, and I say, "Bob's a good guy, let's give him 10. That's haram. You cannot do that. An invalid contract. You cannot do that. Cancel the contract and sell it the actual money it's worth. Right? So you cannot so when under someone's care, you cannot be generous with their money and you cannot squander their money. You can use their money in their financial interests. Right? And Allahu Alam, there may be, for example, teaching the child how to give sadaqah. For example, on the Friday, you go to Jummah and you say, "Here's your money, and this is what you're going to buy sweets with, and this you're going to put, for example, 10 cents in the charity box," to teach him, because that's in their interest. It's part of their education, possibly, arguably, right? Allahu Alam. I don't know if that's the fatwa or not, but there'll be an argument for that. But generally speaking, you are responsible for their worldly and financial interests, and it's not in their interests to pay more for something that would, etc. You couldn't, for example, sell to them. I'm going to sell my house to my child for extortionate money because he's got so much money. You can't do that. It's not in his interests. Right? You can't do that. Major point then, practical point, is clarity, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, in many countless hadiths, forbade vague contracts. And as narrated, the Prophet ﷺ, Naha Rasulullah ﷺ an bay'il ghara. The Prophet ﷺ forbade vague contracts. So vague contracts are for haram. You cannot do vague contracts. Anything that's vague in a contract will make the contract haram and invalid. Why is this? It's part of the sanctity of property. So again, there is a risk of that sanctity being abused. Your property is sacred, and that may be abused. And to avoid dispute, right? To avoid disputes. Well, I don't see my property as sacred, and I don't care. That doesn't matter. The Sharia comes along and says your property, whether you like it or not, is sacred. And whether you will actually get into a dispute or not is irrelevant. The fact that if normally this would result in a dispute, then it would be problematic. Okay, so lack of clarity. So vagueness in a financial contract results in the contract being invalid, meaning it doesn't count. We don't even acknowledge it as even having had happened. And it is sinful, right? There is sin and it's invalid. It doesn't even count, right? So for example, things the Prophet forbade, for example, the offspring of a prize stud. So I have an amazing horse that's really, really good. And you're like, "Farid, that's such a good horse, right? Can I pay now for its son?" So, well, I don't know. I mean, no, we want to make this stud with that mare, and it's going to be, I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. I'm willing to pay now. I'll do it. I don't mind. So it doesn't matter if you don't mind. You can't do that. Why? Because the lack of clarity is whether or not that thing will actually be realized. You can't do that. The Prophet forbade buying crops before they're ripe. You can't do that. So I'm going to buy the crops from this field. These look fantastic. They're looking good. They're going in the right trajectory. I'll buy it. In 3 months, they're going to be perfect. I'll buy it now. You can't do that. Why? So the Prophet said, Well, what if it doesn't work out? How are you going to take your brother's money? Notice the ethics and the theory involved. That you don't, what if it's not going to work out? Okay, you've taken money for something that's not necessarily realized. You can't do that. So the uncertainty of whether or not that thing will be realized, the uncertainty of the qualities. So I'll buy any car you want. Give me a car for this much money. Okay, I'll give you a car for this much money. You can't do that. You have to specify what kind of car, which year, how much, what mileage, everything that would affect the price, you have to mention. Things that don't affect the price, you don't have to mention, but you have to be clear about the qualities of something, right? Clear out the payment. So I'll pay you next week. When? I'll pay the end of the week. Okay, thank you very much. The end of the week is till midnight, as we would understand it, midnight on Sunday, for example. That means it's going to be paid. Done. Right? But I'll pay you sometime. You can't do that. Right? A debt, you can do that. It's different. So a debt is something else. Just lend me $1,000. I'll pay you back sometime soon. That's fine. A debt, but not a sale contract. You can't have a sale contract like that because there's an X for Y, and the X for Y is not clear. When is it going to be paid? We don't know. Or delivery date. Well, I'll buy the thing and it's going to be delivered whenever. Right? That's not acceptable. I don't mind when it comes. Yeah, but you can't do that. You're not allowed to do that. If it's just whenever. Right? Unclear services. So I don't even know what that really means. Right? I don't know what that service I'm getting is. Right? So you cannot have these things. So unclear services, unclear things. You can't do that. Unclear amounts, whatever. You can't have these things. Right? Now this is generally mitigated. Right, the effect of lack of clarity, the fact that lack of clarity would make the contract immoral, haram, and invalid, is mitigated by common need. Sometimes there are things that you just can't know. For example, when you buy an egg, what's the egg? What do you want? What do you want in the egg? You want the thing inside the shell or the thing on the outside the shell? Or I want the thing inside the shell. Well, I've never seen it. Well, it doesn't matter because everybody buys and sells eggs. So like, I don't know what's inside the egg. You buy a melon, I don't know what it's like inside. So vegetables, many food things like that. There is a level of vagueness. I don't know the reality of what I'm buying. So, but what am I supposed to do? What, like break every single egg you buy? That's ridiculous, right? You can't do that. You buy a house based on inspections, based on this. I don't know how exactly it was made and what it's the foundations, everything. So there is some level of vagueness, but it's either, for example, the relative insignificance of that lack of clarity, meaning it's not really going to affect things very much, or that there's just common need for something like that, right? There's a common need for something like that. For example, the vagueness of a contract could be in that I give you 3 days to work out whether you want the car or not. So I said, listen, I honestly can't decide. Should I buy out this car or not? I buy it on the proviso that I have 3 days to decide. Well, that's vague, isn't it? It's a bit vague, like, I don't know. Is he going to buy it? Is he not? Like, where's the contract? Yeah, but there's common need for that. So that's why the Sharia allowed it. Right? So generally what you find is there is a push and pull between certain things. How vague it is, how much of a need there is. Okay. So sometimes also common practice will make things clear. So for example, business class. Well, you didn't define business class. Yeah, but there are standards. There are like world standards of business class, even though you didn't actually define the size of the chair, the this or that. I'm not coming from Mars, right? And so there is a kind of thing that, yes, the urf, right? What is acknowledged? This is, Uber. They'll say, click this luxury car. Exactly what have they defined? They haven't really defined it. And you could imagine that they would, if you ordered a whole load of luxury cars and Uber kind of tried to shortcut you and they tried to put a luxury car that wasn't there, you could imagine a court case coming in there, right? But generally there is common practice, right? What is for example, a meal, how big is it? How much food? There's common practice. Things are unacknowledged, right? Now, if there's not acknowledged, then it's not going to be valid. So then you can imagine cross-culture, cross-national contracts. You have to stipulate things a bit more because things are going to be unknown and they are going to result in, argument. But basically the fact that it's known, it's fine, right? The fact that I kind of have an idea in my mind, it's fine. Okay. So common need will also push for it. Right? So there'll be certain scenarios where there is a need for something. The need is so great that it will allow it, even though we don't really know what's going on. Right? An example of that is what's called Sharakat al-Abdan, right? So two companies come together, right? Two companies come together. One is going to do the marketing and one is going to do the production. The other one is going to do distribution. So three companies. So we've defined tasks, okay? And then we're going to, based on these tasks, we're going to split the profits. So this is an invalid contract according to the Shafi'is. Why? Because I don't really know how much work you're going to do. I don't know how hard you're going to work. And so I can employ you to do that. I can employ you to do that service. That's fine. But I can't do a sharika thing. I can't split the profits on that way. You can't do that. You couldn't do that. You couldn't say, for example, you make the burgers, I'll deliver them, and we'll split the profit. You can't do that in the Shafi school because it's vague. The other schools allowed it because they say, well, everybody needs to do that, right? That's a normal thing that you do, right? Companies might need to do that. Individuals who don't have the money to hire people and have the money to hire a van, there's a common need for it. So there'll be a push and pull depending how much need there is and how vague it is, right? And need will vary from like dire need, like life and death, to nigh dire need, to very, very awkward, to somewhat awkward, and it will trickle down. And eventually it'll be like, hey, I wanted to buy, the scenario of the stud, for example. I really wanted to buy that horse. I know there's a need for it, but the need isn't that great. And the vagueness is very great. And so the tug of war was lost. This is generally what we see, right? Something that is vague, it will either be irrelevant because the vagueness is irrelevant, or it's there, but there's a common need for it, or it's there and the need isn't great enough, so we're going to forbid it, even though it's a bit difficult, right? Also, another thing is the vagueness being secondary. So, for example, bonuses. So your salary isn't that amazing, but your bonuses are fantastic. Well, that's vague, isn't it? How do I know I'm going to meet the target? I'm going to do my 40 hours a week, and I'm going to do normal work. How do I know whether or not I'm going to get these sales? How do I know the other team members are going to, I don't know. But these bonuses are secondary, so it's different, right? Go and buy, for example, buy this tomato and you have a chance of winning this. So whoever buys, for example, baked beans today, they get a chance of winning. That's secondary. So it's completely vague. I've got, it's basically lottery. It's basically gambling. Yeah, but it was secondary because I bought this can. I want to eat this thing. And whether or not I win this prize is secondary. That was kind of it wasn't part and parcel of what I was doing. So something being secondary, a secondary vagueness is usually overlooked, right? Unless it becomes primary. So then here's the issue of conventional insurance. So conventional insurance, I know that if my factory were to burn down, I would lose X amount of money. And I know that if I pay this much money in insurance to insure my factory against fire damage, it's a lose but win. I know if it happens, I win a lot because I'll get a lot of money out of it. And I'm spending this much money, I can deal with that. The company as well knows that if they insure enough buildings against fire, statistically, they'll make money, right? They're making money. So the way the insurance company works is based on statistics. It's based on the fact that it's not an issue of a service. It's not that, when, for example, let's compare an insurance company versus a bodyguard. Okay, what does a bodyguard do? How many times does he take the bullet? I don't know, never. The bodyguard can stand in front of your house or walk around with you for 50 years and never do a single thing, right? So what's the difference? That's insurance and this is insurance, right? It's quite different though. Or, it's quite different. One is this company knows that statistically we have enough customers paying this much money that we're going to make money, whether or not there is, whether or not there's one or two or three within the normal statistic, reasonable thing will actually burn down. And so we're just basing the fact on chance, right? And so it's not like they're providing a service that may or may not be useful for me. Is that the service that they're actually going to provide for me is completely unknown, right? And so conventional service, according to the majority of modern scholars, right, is in principle haram. Now, again, where's the mitigation? Is not need. It's not common. It's common need. It's common necessity. So whether I like it or not, as a renter, I have to pay in-house insurance. Whether I like it or not, as a driver of a car, you have to pay insurance. So this is called al-aqd bil-idhan, being forced to something. This is essentially darura, right? It's not within your legal will, your power to refuse, right? So the general fatwa with exceptions, is conventional fatwa, conventional insurance is haram unless you are forced into it. The only way you can have a medical practice is to be insured. Fine, I'll do it. The only way you can have a house is to be insured. Fine, I'll do it. But also ad-daruratu tuqaddaru biqadriha, right? Dire need is restricted to the bare minimum. Certain modern scholars said, no, actually, conventional insurance is clear. You know what you're getting. It says it there. You're going to get X, Y, and Z. And so you know what you're getting, right? Certain scholars have said that. So it's not an issue of consensus, but the vast majority of scholars would say conventional insurance is no, because there's a number of problems with it. But again, what we would say is, like, practically speaking, keep to the bare minimum. That's it, right? And that's Allahu Alam. But again, not everything called insurance is insurance. And not everything called a credit card is a credit card. Not everything called a debit card is a debit card. Not everything called interest is interest. Meaning, there are certain financial concepts of things, and there are Islamic concepts of things. They're not necessarily the same thing. So refer to a mufti. Okay, apologize again. We're going over today. The formulae of contracts. So generally, contracts take the form of words or writing. Okay, again, we're trying to talk about in the context of a court, what was said, what was written, right? Generally speaking, okay? So, but can you do things can you do things only in word? You can, right? So right now, I have a car, okay? I own a car. Okay, I don't legally own the car because it's not on my name, but actually, morally, I do own the car. So morally, I own the car. I explain the car in all details to Atif, and I say, I hereby sell you the car. And he says, I hereby accept. Done. Okay, but there's no contract. There was no DMV. There was no this. It doesn't matter. Morally, it counts, right? Morally, it counts. There is a transfer of ownership. You do owe me the money, and the car is yours, right? And so words count. Is it sunnah? So, and writing is sunnah, right? And so it's not a good idea, obviously, to do these things. And it's a very bad idea to have your car in someone else's name, and who sold it to somebody else or something else. But that's about the practicalities of the Sharia and the practicalities of how you do trade as opposed to the morality of it, right? Slightly different things. So generally speaking, we're going to have words and deeds, things that happen in your head, usually. For example, in your head, you say, I hereby sell something. It doesn't happen, right? And therefore, we don't even care what your intentions are, usually. So there were two witnesses that heard me say, I hereby sell this car to so-and-so. And he said, I hereby accept. Done. Or I wrote this contract out, and there we go. So by default, we don't really care what your intention was. Complete contradistinction to last week, right? Which is, what were your intentions? Because it's a purely moral issue. This is not a purely moral issue. This is a thing about rights and obligations. So it's not, it's something very different. And so we don't really care about your intentions usually, unless we need to know what's going on. What did you really intend? Sometimes we will ask the person, what did you intend by those words? What did you intend by this language? True, right? We'll also investigate equivocal and unequivocal language, and that's where the intention will come in. So what language did you use, right? Was it equivocal or unequivocal, right? Right, as any contract are, when you read contract, they don't make any sense because they speak in so clear that they don't make sense. Common practice is also relevant, right? So the fact that I was on the phone the whole time. I walk into the 7-Eleven, I put the bottle on the counter, give him my debit card, type it in, and I finish a conversation, walk out. Say, well, where were the words and where was the writing? So, well, there was writing. There was something written. Okay, well, let's imagine there's no card. You just put money on the till, on the counter. There was no receipt. There was nothing there. Nothing was ever written. Does it count? Yeah, common practice. So whatever is done in common practice is fine. However, a contract like that will happen in common practice is fine. But we would all agree that nobody walks up to Atif with a briefcase of $1 million and then winks at him, and then and then that means sell me your house. Nobody does that, right? And if they did that, it would be fine, but nobody does that. So therefore, it would be invalid. So if now I go to court and I say, well, I gave him the money and I winked, meaning give me the house. It was not clear. It was not common practice. Atif has no idea what on earth is going on, and I'm trying to demand the right access to this house that I rightfully bought, and he's saying what on earth is going on. The court is not going to be in his favor. It's going to be in his favor because that's not common practice, right? The other discussion that we had last week or the week before was technical words. Does it matter about the technical words that you use, or does it matter what is intended? Right, that was another discussion. So we mentioned in the Shafi'i school, for example, technical words are very relevant. So if I say, I hereby sell you this house for 1 month for $3,000, which means rent, of course, we don't care that you meant rent, and we don't care that the person intended rent and you meant rent. You said sell. And so a sale contract, when it is conditioned to a certain time, is an invalid contract. Therefore, it's an invalid contract. Sorry, can't do that, right? And that's how usually legal systems would work, right? You notice the Shafi school in financial transaction is very technical and very nitpicky. It doesn't usually bend very much, whereas the Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki school, they bend a lot more and when it comes to financial transactions. Okay, key topics that we talk about, obviously sales, buying and selling. We talk about buying and selling, the right to cancel. So the right to cancel, for example, because of a defect, the right to cancel because on spot. This is a debated issue among the scholars. Can you, if you're still on the place of the contract, can you after the contract is done, can you cancel it? The right to cancel upon agreement. Can I, for example, stipulate I have 3 days, etc. And so the Malikis, so generally the Shafis, Hanafis, and Hanbalis, they say you have 3 days. You can't go over 3 days. So you can stipulate you have 1 day by agreement, mutual agreement, or 2 days or 3 days, and it could be either or both parties. So I have a right and you don't. You have a right and I don't, or we both have a right to cancel within 3 days. But generally speaking, you can't go over 3 days. The Malikis, they said, again, with common practice. So whatever, given the dictates of this type of sale and what is common practice and what there is a need to do, they said you can do more than that. So if, for example, this thing would take a week or take a month, you could do that, right? Depending on what it is. We talk about forward sales. So that means paying now and getting the thing later on, right? Obviously being owed that thing. Hiring and renting. So they are essentially the same concept. There are two different things. So then like hiring something generic, hiring something specific, hiring somebody on a one-off task, like a plumber to come to your house versus hiring somebody in an employment contract. There are differences in terms of liability and other things there in terms of what repercussions could happen to the contract later on. Profit sharing, for example, where I put the money in and you do the work, right? So that's a profit sharing thing, right? So for example, in an Islamic bank, you're going to put in, they're going to say, for example, we're going to do, an Islamic bank, this is what they'll do, is they'll say, you choose which kind of bank, which kind of account you want, and you have this account. So we're going to take, for example, 10% of your minimum balance for the whole year, and we're going to invest it. And we're gonna, for example, put something besides for insurance, to insure things, not insurance proper, but to guarantee, save some money, save some of that. We're going to take 60% and give you 40% of the profit, for example, right? So you can get quote unquote interest, but you actually are profit sharing. You could lose, but generally you don't lose because they are clever investors, right? And they do things in clever ways. So that's profit sharing, for example. Crop sharing. So that's something, again, that doesn't apply to our life today, but it's the same concept. I have the land and you have the work. Can you do that? Given the fact that it's somewhat circular. So the problem with crop sharing as a financial thing is you're doing a service for me and I'm doing a service for you. You're working on my land and I'm giving you the usufruct of this land. So there's a kind of, but the problem is what I'm paying you with comes from the same thing that I'm giving you. If that makes any sense. So if I were to pay you to work on my land, that's fine. But here, I'm giving you a percentage of the crops for you to work on my land. So what if it's not very much? What if it's a lot? There's problem with this. That's why we find among many of the fuqaha, they don't actually allow it. And there are certain hadith that actually forbid it, right? But many of the ulama do allow it, right? The point is the circularity of the finance, that the payment for the service is coming from the service itself, right? Which is problematic, right? But it's slightly different to profit sharing, but slightly similar, right? And profit sharing as well, there's a risk, right? We mentioned the ambiguity, how much are you going to work, right? But we talk about these things and the conditions therein and how it works and how we manage, etc. Simple companies. So the simplest company is I get $10, you get $10, we put it together, we have $20 that's joint owned. We buy something that's worth $20 and we sell it for $25 and we split $12.50 each, for example, the simplest company possible. But then there are other types of companies as well. We mentioned Sharikat al-Abdan, where we have a joint effort, but there's no money, there's no capital put up, right? And also in simple companies, we talk about the type of capital that can be put up. Does it have to be fungible? Can it not be fungible, etc. Right? We talk about agency. So basically you standing in the stead of anybody else doing any of these contracts, right? Gifts. So a gift contract, for example, or a sadaqah, which is slightly different. So there's a gift, there's a sadaqah, and there is what? Present. They're slightly different. But for example, the difference, let's just imagine the difference in terms of the offer and acceptance. So I have a horse, okay? I have, mashallah, a lot of property and I have a horse. I lose my property and I am stuck with this horse. So what do? I call up Atif and say, Atif, can I just come around your house? He's like, yeah, sure. I come round, tie the horse to his house, come for a cup of tea and then walk off. And he's like, Farid, you left your horse here. And I said, no, it's a gift. Atif laughs and said, no, thank you, but I don't want it. And I said, no, I've given it to you. So now the police, after 24 hours, turn up and say, what on earth is going on here? Atif, you have a horse outside your house. And he's like, for God's sake, it's not my, so whose horse is this? So a gift is a transfer of ownership. But you notice it's very, very different to charity. So Atif is starving and I turn up at his house in the middle of the night and leave a bag of rice under the door without anybody noticing. Does he need to accept that? No. Okay, well, a gift and charity, they're not the same thing, right? So there are nuances with gifts and contracts. It's not the same thing. And there's also some certain moral issues to do with contract, with gifts, for example, who you can return a gift from, right? It's slightly different. Loans, which is essentially loaning currency or fungible items to somebody, right? Which is different to borrowing. So borrowing is slightly different to a loan. So can I borrow, for example, a bag of rice, a kilo of rice from you, or $10? Yes. And I'm going to give back another $10 and another bag of rice of the same quality and the same amount. These are called fungible items. As opposed to when you're borrowing a bike, you're borrowing this bike. It's slightly different, right? There's a slightly different relationship. Which is also different to, so a loan, for example, as well, is different to a deposit. So when we go to the bank and we deposit money, we are not depositing money as you would deposit, for example, deposit in the Sharia concept, in the Islamic concept, is when you're leaving a trust with somebody, right? Can you just leave this phone with you while I go to the bathroom, right? That's not called a loan, that's called a trust. You could charge me for that. For example, I'm going to leave this phone with very important information on it in a safe in a bank, and I'm going to pay, for example, $25 a month for them to look after it, or $50 a month, whatever it is. That's not called a deposit, right? That's called a wadi'ah. That's called leaving a trust to somebody. So when you deposit money with the bank, that's called a loan, because the money that you gave to the bank, they're borrowing the money from you, right? They're borrowing the money from you. It's called a loan, right? And they're going to give you the equivalent back at any time you want, right? That's called a loan, right? So we call it a deposit and you call it a balance, but it's essentially a loan, right? That's what's happening. We speak about collateral. So again, a collateral against a loan. So a loan could be, again, a loan like, here, just lend me some money, or in the scenario of ayat ad-dain, the verse of debt, for example, in the Quran, that whole page of the Quran's a verse where it mentions that you have a forward sale. So I'm going to buy, I want 10 camels of this description next year at this date. Here's the money. Well, what's the guarantee that you're going to turn up? Collateral, for example. And guarantees versus something else, which is guaranteeing someone else's debt, and that could be voluntary or with an agreement. Bankruptcy, what happens when someone's bankrupt? how do we divide the current liquid assets that are there? Who had priority based on collateral, based on other items as well, other relevant things as well. So these are the general. There are many other topics as well. They're talking in Islamic finance or talking about in a traditional book of Islamic law, but these are the main discussions we talk about. Okay, and then so my apologies, going over again, but just difficult to deal with everything in such a brief way. Modern financial concept. So the number one thing is that currency is a tool, not a commodity. So gold, silver, dollars, euros, yen, these are tools to buy and sell. And they are not, it's not a commodity. So you do not buy and sell currency. You can buy and sell currency, and it existed and it's valid, right? But it's not, the point of gold and silver is a tool to exchange goods and services, right? That's why when you can rent out a house, but you cannot rent out money. Right? What's the difference? Here's money, here's $1 million. Here's a house for a year, give me back whatever, 50,000 on top. Here's $1 million, give me back $1 million. What's the difference? Currency is a tool for you to exchange services, whereas a house is a commodity. Okay, so it's a fundamental conceptual difference, right? Fundamental conceptual difference, which also has repercussions on the economy of the world. So the other issue then is sharing risk, right? The other issue in the Islamic finance is risk should be shared, right? Risk has to be shared, right? We'll see an example of that now. And so in Murabaha, for example, there was a level of sharing risk. Now you can limit your risk, right? You can limit your risk. Right? I remember a module, for example, a very short module in Islamic finance course we took is basically just like clever ways of reducing risk, right? You don't, as a bank, for example, you want to make money. You don't care about, you're not trying to buy and sell. You're just trying to make money out of money. And so you don't want to play with annoying impracticalities or risks, So you're trying to mitigate your risk as much as possible, which is fine, but there has to be some level of risk. And then essentially selling debt for debt. These are the problems, right? When you sell debt for debt, it becomes problematic. Right? Or selling things that aren't real, right? As I mentioned, for example, selling, the right to buy something. It's not a real asset. So we're going to convey. So I want to buy a house. I'm in Concord. Here's a house. It's going to cost $500,000. This is what it costs. And so they say, Farid, do you have cash? You say, no, you don't. I say, oh, but I'll just pay it off in installments. I'm like, yeah, great. You'll pay it off in installments over 50 years. What's the point in that? Nobody's going to sit around and wait for you to pay them off. Okay. So what happens? A middleman turns up who has cash or has access to cash. So here is Ahmed, and here is Bank of America. So Ahmed says, well, is it a good house? Is it a bad house? What's the whole story? Because Ahmed cares about it. Why? Because of two reasons. Number one, he's going to buy the house. And number two, he's going to use the house as collateral. Okay. So what he's going to do then, Ahmed says, Farid, show me that the house is worth what it's worth, location, this. Show me all the legalities, everything. Show me there's a house worth buying. Okay. So now he's gonna and he's telling, and what's the selling price? $500,000. Okay, fine. So I say, Ahmed, are you happy to buy the house? Mr. Bank, Ahmed Bank, whatever. Yes. Okay. So now I do 3 contracts. I do a contract between the bank. So that for that, number one is that the bank is going to sell the house to me. So the bank doesn't want to buy a house and then have the house on his hand. So it's going to contract a promise contract that they will sell the house to me once they buy it for this much money, with these conditions, with everything. So we sign the contract. Contract number 2, that we're going to buy the bank, Ahmed Bank buys the house from the seller. Here's $500,000. Thank you very much. Done. The ownership of the house now shifts to the bank. Okay, and there's an important proviso that we're going to mention. Well, I'll mention it now. Is there has to be 2 stages of legal handover. So there has to be physical or legal ownership by the bank. The bank can't just quote unquote own the house. before it sells it to me. They have to have control of that house, such that they could sell it to me or sell it to somebody else, right? There are certain ways around it, given certain legislations, but the point is there has to be physical or effectual or legal control of that house. It's called qabd, right? If I sell this phone right now to Atif, Atif cannot sell it to Fahima until he takes possession of it. You can't do that. So I say, hereby sell it sell it for $100, sold. Now, now Atif, before taking hold of it, sells it to Fahima. He can't do that. Haram, invalid. You cannot sell something. You can own something before you take possession of it, but you can't sell it on until you take possession of it. So with something that's portable like this, you have to take physical hold of it, right? When something like a house, you have the key or you have the title, it's in your name, right? So there are certain ways around some of these things to make the bureaucracy a little bit less, but essentially the house is moving from owner A to the bank, from the bank to owner B, okay? Bank sells a house to the house buyer at fixed profit. So it was $500,000. Okay, Farid, how long are you going to take to pay it off? 30 years. Okay, we want another $500,000 on top. So, oh, blimey, I'm buying a house at $1 million. It only costs half. That's why you're ripping me off. Because you're paying me over 30 years. So, okay. So he buys it for one price and sells it to another price. It's all known and all clear, right? Fixed profit. So it was this amount and now this amount. Now, he doesn't want me to default. So what does he do? He says the collateral against this debt, right, which is going to be what? Down payment. So 1 million minus a down payment, right, is number one, there's going to be insurance, house insurance, and they're going to work that out in different ways. And so you need to make sure there are different ways this happens, because there's going to be house insurance, whether you like it or not, whether it's halal or not, it's going to be there. There might be other issues as well. Other things, and so they might vary how we're going to split the fees and different things. But what the essential thing that he's going to do is he's going to make the house the collateral against the debt. So there's two places where the bank can lose out now. There's two places where number one, that the bank bought the house, but it wasn't worth it, and the bank sold it to me, and I found a fault with the house. I go back to the bank and say, Mr. Bank Manager Ahmed, you sold me a house that is rubbish. This is not worth it. I want my money back. So now I get my money back from the bank. What's the bank going to do now? Nothing. So there was a risk. So they did trade with a risk. So they made money with a risk. Where's risk number two? I default. I can't pay off the debt. So they now sell the house and they get back a fraction of what they wanted. Right?
Well, what if the buyer backs out of buying the house from the bank?
That's why you have the contract. The contract, that promise contract. So I don't know how that works here in America legally, but I know I did a murabaha contract with a car in Jordan that was legally binding in the civil, not the Sharia court, the civil court in Jordan. You could not opt out of it. It's not like, oh, you have a choice. You will be forced to do it. The bank will force you, the court will force you to do it. If you just say, I don't want to do it, they'll force you.
But what does the Sharia say? I mean, can the Sharia court enforce it as well?
Yes. The Sharia court will enforce it. So I don't know, in Saudi, for example, what do they do? But they have murabaha contracts, of course, and they are legitimate, real contracts that mean something in a court. It's not just something in a mosque or something like that. It's a real contract, right?
So it's a right. No, it's actually a promise to buy. It's
a promise to buy, yes. And so that is based on the Maliki school. In the Maliki school, you can make a promise whose breaking would result in financial harm must be kept. So if I say, for example, I'm gonna come and visit you, and I'm sort of say sure, but I honestly don't have the money to stay at a hotel. You're like, fine, you can stay at my house. I knock at your door and you're like, oh, sorry, bro, I can't. And we're like, yeah, but I don't have the money to stay at a hotel. You are obliged in the Maliki school to keep to that promise, because your promise resulted in my financial harm. So that's the position that they took, and this is a position adopted by, for example, the AOFI standards of Islamic finance. And this is, it's a legal contract. So these banks in whatever Muslim countries, they're not religious. They're just trying to make money. They don't care about, is it halal or haram? So they're doing a contract like this because they know there's customers for it, and it's binding, and it's actually enforceable, right? So again, the legalities of it. What does it look like in America? I don't know. I don't know what it looks like, how the legalities of it. Anyway, that's so. There are many banks. There are many banks like Devon Bank and other banks that, for example, are legitimate and have murabaha contracts or other things. There's also something called diminishing partnership, which is something else. I don't want to talk about that now. So now let's compare that against the not conventional mortgage. Conventional mortgage. So the only difference really is the bank is going to look here as well, because they want to know, okay, you're buying this house. What's the chance of you not paying? What's the chance of us being able to sell this thing? What's the whole thing? No, they're not just going to be like, oh yeah, let's go and make money, right? They don't do that. They work in a clever way. But where's the problem is here. So there's money is loaned to me to go and buy that thing. Money is given to the house seller. The house is owned by the house buyer. There was no point when the bank owned that property. So the bank has no risk. It doesn't matter if there's something wrong with the house. I'm going to go back to the original owner, not to the bank. So the bank is making profit without the risk. Their risk is down here, right? And so there is a level of risk, right? And so, but where's the problem is I buy this phone, like right now, I buy this phone from somebody and I sell it to somebody else for more money. Perfectly fine. That's called trade. Perfectly fine. As opposed to selling money. So the bank is renting out money. You cannot rent out money. That's called riba. It's called riba. So it's a very fine, there's a fine difference. And so why is it that Islamic finance then, why do you have to pay more? Because these guys are risking more. And so they're going to cover their backs more. They're going to say bigger you have to. We don't know. We're going to put more stipulations. You know, it's less likely we're going to okay you. You're going to put a bit higher. Usually, put a higher down payment. There's more risk involved. So they're going to put they have less money to play with in principle, and so they're going to charge you more, right? Whereas here they're not risking. They're not risking the same risk. Right? They are just lending you money and selling you the use of the money, and they're backing them. They're also, you know, they're also going to cover their backs as well to some extent. So the backing thing is the same, right? So that's why, again, if you have a halal mortgage, it may well say interest on it, but there are these differences. So are these differences merely superficial? Are these differences merely superficial? Well, let's ask this question. And please forgive my French, right? And there's a British phrase, you know. Someone sleeps with a prostitute. May Allah protect us all. And the prostitute gets pregnant. Whose child is this? Excuse me. Whose child is this? It's not the man's. It's an illegitimate child. It's not a child. It's not. This is a fatherless child. Okay. Whereas, what if the same prostitute, may Allah protect us all, said, I hereby marry myself to you, and he says, I hereby accept. And there were two half-drunk witnesses. There are repercussions. This is your son, whether you like it or not. So the way we see murabaha applied today is not like that, but it's a bit like that. You will see the money. Where does the money come from? It comes from a bank. So the whole system is not good. It's not an immoral system. But at the end of the day, your side of the coin is not haram. Right? Your side of the coin is not haram. There is a difference. There is a difference between marriage and prostitution. Yeah, it's not a very good marriage. That's not an Islamic marriage, but it is Islamically valid. And so much of what we see today, the whole system is messy. The whole system is messy, true. But on your individual level, at least it's halal. That your relationship with the bank, their money comes from that bank, it's all the same thing, and is okay by the same people, and is called interest. There is a significant difference, right? And just to give an example of the significant difference, you know, Sayyidina Bilal, he's very excited because the harvest, the date harvest is very good. And he says, Ya Rasulullah, mashallah, look at all these dates, it's really, really good. We sell a kilo of, paraphrasing, a kilo of these dates for 2 of those. And the Prophet says, oof, riba. He's like, what are you talking about? These dates are like not very good quality, and these dates are really good quality. So obviously, a kilo of these are worth, other round. A kilo of these are worth 2 kilos of those. And the Prophet says, riba, riba. And they say, well, how? Well, because it's dates for dates. You cannot trade unless it's like for like. It has to be the same amount. Okay, so what's the solution? Sell these dates and buy those dates. Okay, it's the same thing. What's the difference? So a kilo of dates or 2 kilos of poor quality dates are worth the same as a good half the value. So it's the same as 1 kilo of good quality dates. So surely you can just exchange 2 for 1. Haram, riba, you can't do that. Okay, what you have to do then? Sell these for cash, get the cash, buy that. Okay, what's the difference? There is a difference, right? So when people come along and say there's no difference, you say, yeah, there's no difference on a certain angle. It's true. On a higher level, there's no difference. It's the same messy system of un-Islamic finance. True. But on a lower level, there is a difference, and it is a Sharia recognized difference that does have a difference. Right? And so it's relevant. Okay. My apologies again. We keep going over. I try to keep this to an hour or less, but so with murabaha, the profit must be fixed. It cannot vary. Right? The profit cannot vary. Otherwise, then it's riba again. You can't. So what you cannot do is ever say, well, pay early and I'll reduce it, or pay later and increase it. You can't do that. Right? What they can do is pay early and we may reduce it as a gift. That's up to them. That's not contractually binding. You cannot have direct financial penalties. You cannot say, if you do not pay your monthly installments, then we're going to charge you this much money. You can't do that. But what you can do is you say, if you do not pay, you're going to pay. If for example, there's 2 months late in a row, there's going to be a $5,000 penalty fine that will go to charity. It's different. So the problem is, if I charge you because you didn't pay me in time, I'm charging you interest. I'm essentially saying pay later and get more. That's interest. But if I say no, you're being penalized for a morally good thing to give charity, there's an incentive for you to make sure you make your payments, because you don't want to pay that $5,000 fine. But it's not going to me, so it's just interest. It's going to charity. It's different. And those will be the 2 stages of legal handover. So again, it's either physically, that somebody. So in order for the bank to sell the thing to you, they have to take financial control over it. It shifts from them to you. There are liability shifts in there. There are all sorts of things that are happening legally at that time. You might even notice it might be a 2-minute thing, but there is a legal shift then. There is a liability shift. The fact that you're now going back to them and not back to the original owner, right? There is a difference. There is significance of that. Okay, creating money. So what do we do in modern Islamic finance? We come along and say, guys, we want to make money and we want to do it in a halal way. Okay, fine. How are you going to make money in a halal way? So what we do is we get the basic, simple contracts that already exist, buying and selling, renting, and we profit sharing and simple companies, and we make huge companies. So that's what we do. So for example, we get a huge company. Instead of having 2 people, we have 1,000 people. These 1,000 people invest in this company. This company provides services, for example, flights, and then people buy those shares off those people, and then that's how it works, stocks and shares, right? So it's essentially a very simple thing, but it's just a matrixy, a complex system of contracts within contract. That's all, right? So example of that is careful insurance. So you're like, Farid, insurance is haram. Okay, what are you going to do about it then? Practically, when you have a car crash, I don't care about halal, haram. Practically, Farid, what are you going to do about it? Good point. Or medical insurance, what are you going to do about it when you need $500,000 or whatever to do a heart transplant or whatever it is? So, well, I'm going to do takaful. So I'm going to say, Atif, Fahima, Ridwan, Farid, everybody, we're going to put money in a pot every week. How much are you going to put in? $500. That's a lot of money. Yeah, but that's $2,000 at the end of the month. And that means the 4 of us, that means we have $8,000 at the end of the month. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use this. We're going to keep putting it in a pot. After 6 months, we're going to employ Bob, who's an investor and a manager, to start investing this money. So this money is just being saved and invested, saved and invested, saved and invested. And we agree within ourselves that whenever any of us need it for medical issues, we can just take it as a gift. Like, really? Oh, mashallah. So what happens is then we have 1 million people. Each of us are paying, for example, $300 a month. You have all this cash. This cash, we are all investors. So we have a whole company that is managing these funds, collecting these funds, organizing these funds, distributing these funds, and investing these funds. These funds are increasing, and we're all basically making money, okay? And then we're all giving each other money whenever we want it. That's takaful. Not that complex. So we just shifted from haram to halal. Simple, right? So where's the rub? Where's the problem? Is there not enough people to do it? So when you have 1 million people to do it, it's great. But if you only have 10, it doesn't work because you don't have that kind of money to deal with. Let's say, medical insurance. How are you going to cover that? Medical insurance, right? How are you going to cover that with takaful if you had 10 people, like you and your mosque? It's not going to work. So that's why we need to have a joint effort in order to do it. Right? But it's quite simple. Tawarruq, right? So I need to get cash. I need cash. I want to buy a house, for example, as a down payment. So what do? I do a forward sale with A, where he pays me, for example, $1 million in order to deliver him, I don't know, X amount of milk or whatever it is in the next 6 months, FedEx up times. Okay. And then I buy that same thing with cash at a cheaper price, and I just make money. So what I'm doing is tawarruq, it's called making money, right? Is you're just doing a matrices of contracts that means where that you get the money and you just have cash at the end, or you have cash at particular times, right? So there's all sorts of creative things that you can do in a halal way, right? It's not that complex. What you cannot do is sell debt for debt. So for example, we are going to do this takaful thing, okay? So right now we start. So I say, how much are you going to put in, Atif? $50. So we each put $50, okay? Tomorrow, we tell everybody what we did. It goes on Fox News, everyone's interested. And so Bill Gates calls me up and says, Farid, I want to buy your share of the company. Okay, what's the company worth? Okay, well, it's 4 of us, $50 each, that's $200. Okay, but what's it worth? Everybody's thinking that this company, this mere idea will be worth a lot. So Bill Gates buys it off me for 2,000. So I sold 50 for 2,000. Haram, interest. Okay, well, how do I make money then? You can't sell debt for debt. What you can do though is start the company going. So now once you start the company going and there is business activity, this $50, not just $50, it is a fraction of the actual financial value of the company. So now I'm not selling $50 for $2,000. I'm selling $50 that I invested, which is a fraction of this company that is functioning, and I sell it for $2,000. That's fine. But you cannot sell debt for debt, right? So then again, in Islamic finance, what does financial activity mean precisely, right? That's what they'll define, for example, in the AOFI standards. And it should ultimately serve a Sharia goal. So basically, buying and selling currencies, buying and selling stocks just to make money is not a Sharia goal. You're supposed to do stuff. You're supposed to, for example, start schools that make lots of money, that educate people. You're supposed to, for example, ship, used car parts that serve people. Like somebody needs it, somebody wants it, make money. Why not? But just making money out of money is not ethical, but is not Islamic, but it's not haram, right, in itself. Okay, any immediate questions or queries? So I apologize, we had to cut out a lot. There's lots of things we had to cut out. It's very difficult, and what can we do? And I'm not a Muslim, can't answer.
I have a question, but not related.
Go ahead.
Not directly related to what you said, but over here in the past, they used to have contracts where the seller could put a contingency on the buyer saying whom you can sell in the future.
Yeah, you can't do that.
You can't do that in Islam, is it?
No. Can't do it. Because you can't, because it's there are scenarios where you can say, for example, I'm going to sell you it. There are scenarios like I'm going to sell you it with there are certain things, particularly in the Hanbali school, where you can do certain things like that. But generally speaking, you can't do that. So you can say, I'm selling it to you on the proviso that you not sell it to somebody else. Like, well, what right do you have to say who I sell it to? That's irrelevant.
Well, it's even worse over here. They used to say, if you sell it to this class of people, this property reverts back to me.
Yeah, you can't do that. That's not valid. So the issue then would it be an invalid sale or would it be a haram sale, right? So generally speaking, for the Shafi school, it would be an invalid sale, meaning the fact that you agreed upon that means it's not your property and that it's not their money, right? Whereas opposed to, I believe for the Hanafi, that particular thing in the Hanafi school, we would say it was a haram sale. You're not allowed to agree on that, but you just basically don't honor that condition because it'd be haram to not honor that.
Right.
And then there's a gentleman's agreement, something else, right? So it's not part of the contract.
Mm-hmm.
That's something completely different. Completely different. So you say, listen, Atif, I'm selling you this car, but for God's sake, please don't sell it to those people over there. I really don't like them. Just please don't do that. And then you do it and I'm really ticked off. Like, come on, it's me and you, bro, not against them. Like, that's a gentleman's agreement. It's different. It wasn't part of the contract. So it does not say, I hereby sell you the car on the proviso that you do not sell it to them, and that if you do have the right to sign it off, or we said it at that moment. But it was something else, gentleman's agreement. That was it. Beforehand, we said, listen, we don't sell cars to that guy over there. It's different. That's where you're going to come in an issue of just dhulm. Are you wronging people? Right? Is it sinful the way you're doing? That's something else, but it wouldn't affect the contract. Right? Here, you're talking about the contractually bound not to sell it to these kind of people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's completely different. Right? So, general principle: anything that is not mentioned in the contract does not mean anything. It's not binding, and it doesn't affect the contract, even if you agreed on it. Right? It's not going to affect the contract, but there are scenarios where it would. Okay, Jazakumullah khair, everybody. And my apologies for such a long lesson. Okay, wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Subhanallah bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.